Good morning to everyone, and thank you for attending this panel on Friday morning after the night party and many other things. So I think I appreciate. And the panel is mainly focused on the topic relating to the ethical assessment in the review process for the EU-funded project. The reason of this panel is due to the fact that there is an ongoing process to review the entire structure of ethical assessment, and this will impact on both the traditional, we can say, ethical dimension of the assessment and the new issues related to the fundamental rights, compliance and protection that arise by the AI and the AI Act to some extent. So today we discuss this topic with different kind of speakers, we can say. So we start with Migle Laukites. Sorry, Migle, I know.
No, that was correct.
That was correct. Good. She's Associate Professor of Artificial Intelligence and Law at Pompeu Fabra University in Spain, Barcelona. And she's member of the European Group on Ethics and Science and New Technology at European Commission. Then we have Mihaili Kritikos. He's the Secretary of the European Group on Ethics, Science and New Technology, and Policy Analyst on Ethics and Integrity Sector of the European Commission, DG Research. And then we have Susan Warso. She is Director of Research at the Open Future. And she has quite extensive experience in human rights research and advocacy. Since 2019, she has been independent expert for the European Commission. And then we have David Richel, the head of the data and the digital sector of the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights. And he works since several years, I think. We started discussing about big data with David many years ago, and the agency now is very involved in all the discussion, we can say, about the implementation of the AI Act on the different aspects, including, of course, also the research and research project. Just to frame a little the context, when we talk about research, we don't focus necessarily on academic research, but according also to the AI Act, we cover any kind of research, including also industrial research, so it's not just for academic. So I don't want to take more time for this introduction, and I give the floor to Migle for the first presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can see my presentation, yeah?
Oh.
Yes. Oh, okay, it works. Okay, so thank you very much, Alessandro, for inviting me to this panel. It's a pleasure to share it with other panelists, with some of whom I know from our from previous works on the fundamental rights and artificial intelligence. So it's a great pleasure to be here, and again another year in this conference as well. And it's an honor to talk to you. All. So my part of the I'm the first to talk about to talk about in this panel. So my approach is a little bit more theoretical. So of course we are talking about the artificial intelligence as an object of study, right? So. And in terms of Artificial Intelligence Act, it does not apply to the research in the first place, right? So we do not. Theoretical, at least, we separate the research projects from the commercial applications. But closer the research gets to the deployment, to the actual deployment in the society, more we talk about it. And yet we also, in a way, always stress that Artificial Intelligence Act, especially if you looked at the recitals, is very much inspired in ethics, right? So. I think we need to keep in mind that the ethical basis is enshrined in the Artificial Intelligence Act, and there are many points of convergence, right? So any sort of research on the artificial intelligence Although, like our Directly Artificial Act does not apply, yet there are many things to take into account, these points of convergence that I was stressing. So the data, the already existing ethical principles, right, the transparency, human fundamental rights, and so on and so forth. Yet I think Artificial Intelligence Act is also bringing back to the center of our attention some of the principles which are known, but we have in a way we haven't been focusing on that much, such as human oversight, which I think is one of the most problematic aspects in relation to the artificial intelligence-based project. So human oversight, how are we going to implement it? It is a legal requirement, right? But it's also an ethical, and it's also in a sort of ethical obligation. And I think we haven't found a way to make it, we like this word, but which is, again, will generate other sea of publications. We need to make it, again, meaningful, right? So how to do that, I think, is one of the most important issues we need to address when we talk about the ethics assessment and review of the artificial intelligence related projects. I think we all know that it is that, well, human factor is always the problematic aspect. It's usually very problematic. I also was thinking, well, when Alessandro invited me to this panel, I was also thinking about different ways in which the artificial intelligence, like how we want it to be, and the ethics reviews should interact, right? So what do we want from the artificial intelligence-based projects, and what is the what we can reasonably expect these reviews to achieve, right? So I think in many ways this is the question for this panel as well, and for the other speakers who surely will bring what I'm trying to deliver to the more practical, more operational level, right? So, but it is true that there are different ways in which we can also enshrine the ethical reviews with some of these, for instance, operationalization of ethical principles, for instance, goes through the fairness metrics, right? So we are kind of translating ethical principles into technological standards, which of course are limited, but actually offering some sort of ethical translation of our expectations. It is also about the differential privacy and many more principles. And it is also about many more things that we can do about the ethical matrices, about the different stakeholders that we involve, and also about the anticipation of legal norms, right? So we are, although in the research domain, these artificial intelligence-based applications, cases, are not subject to the normative, to the regulations. It is still ethical compliance helps to make these projects more aligned with ethics. Okay. So I also think that this is how we can use Artificial Intelligence Act also to make these ethical reviews, to enshrine these ethical reviews with the continuity, because what the artificial intelligence-based oriented project teach us, I think, is that the ethics is no longer a result, but it's a continuous process. And I think we all knew it, but in artificial intelligence-oriented project, this becomes a really a necessary requirement to think about, because as far as we see nowadays, we get the financial support. We have the ethical review for the funding, but later on, I think we need to strengthen, and although we usually have these continuous ethical reviews, I think we need to strengthen that part and also ensure that the ethical reviews do continue. Of course, this is, I also think that the artificial intelligence-based projects somehow also change our ethical reviews, right? They should be, they restructure them and, well, introduce them with a new, they make us rethink these ethical reviews, because it is true that nowadays we also see that in many contexts, ethical reviews are, for instance, in many applications, it was bioethical reviews. And nowadays, I think we need a kind of different ethics, artificial intelligence ethics review, so strengthen that part as well. And of course, I think in many cases, these ethical reviews could be useful for us to stop a little bit and, you know, think what kind of artificial intelligence we want to finance, right, with the public money, right? I think ethical reviews, in many cases, this is the starting point for the Commission, for the decision makers, for the policy makers to start thinking, is this something we want, right? Is this kind of project we want? Although it is only research, but if it already starts, goes in the directions which are critical, for instance, which lead to the applications that might be dangerous, that might be related to the prohibited uses of the artificial intelligence, I think ethical reviews are already the first control point to at least flag that this might lead to the very serious consequences. This might lead to fundamental rights violations. So let us be aware of that. I don't say that we should stop this sort of research, but we should be much more aware, attentive, and strengthen the ethical review of these specific kinds of projects. And it is also true that I think there is a kind of question that we haven't yet very, of course, properly addressed, because the Artificial Intelligence Act is new. And we are, for instance, at least in Spain, we are starting to experiment only with some of the companies. What about the artificial intelligence sandbox, which is theoretically is for the companies, for the private entities to experiment with their applications before putting them on the market. But I think for the ethical reviews, for the ethical assessments, these sort of sandboxes could be also very, very beneficial and useful. And I think one of the challenges for us is to find the way to make ethicists become part of these sandboxes and be more involved in them. And I also see from another side is that if we're talking here about the artificial intelligence related projects, so what we study, it is also about how we study. And I think another ethical review challenge, which is forthcoming, is the projects that are generated with the help of, or executed, or brought forward, or somehow realized, right, with the help of or by the artificial intelligence, right? So I think we are going to more and more often review not only projects on artificial intelligence, but projects by artificial intelligence. And this is, I think, another question that asks for certain decisions, or at least asks for some sort of ethical assessment. Is that what we want, honestly? So much so that we do not control. We cannot. Well, we don't even know when these when we're dealing with artificial intelligence generated content, right? So I think this is what I wanted to say. Thank you very much. I think I'm in time.
Yeah,
because you.
perfectly in time.
Yes. So.
Yeah, perfectly in
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this introduction. I think that now we can move from. I don't know if it works properly, but okay. We can move from the general picture that you depicted to the specific implementation of the ethical approach by the European Union with regard to the process that has been created in order to assess the research project. And so I leave the floor to Michalis, that is connected remotely due to another commitment for the Commission. Michalis, are you? Yes. Perfect. Thank you. We see you.
We can't hear you yet.
We don't hear you for the moment.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, very good. Now, perfectly.
Okay. I'm very happy to be here with you, to even remotely. I'm sad not to be physically next to you and to join this wonderful panel. I would like to thank Alessandro first of all for making this happen. It was an idea that was kind of conceived a few months ago. And I think that what we were discussing back then, happened, became a reality in a very successful way. I would like to have a presentation to make, but before doing so, I would like to also say a few things about what Migle just said. I think her points, and I'm going in the presentation, I'm going also to refer to them. The points she made are really, I would say, touching upon the most important, the most sensitive dimensions of what we are currently doing. And I'm going to explain now to what we're trying to achieve in this new technological era, and whether our process is fit for purpose for the challenges that AI brings forward. So I don't know if you can see my slides.
We see the slide, yeah.
Okay, good. So just to explain where I come from and what we do very, very briefly, I'm working for the ethics review sector of the European Commission. It's a horizontal service. It's the ethics appraisal mechanism, as we call it, which is responsible for reviewing all EU-funded projects from an ethics point of view. We're talking about hundreds or even thousands of research proposals that arrive at our desk. And not all of them, of course, require some form of ethics scrutiny. And that is why we have devised a process which is, you can see only a simplified form of that, where we ask our colleagues to, initially perform some pre-screening, and then later on screening if the proposal raises some ethical issues, and if these issues are complex and serious, as we say, this proposal goes through an ethics assessment process. AI, and I have to say that from the very beginning, since it became part of the Horizon Europe framework, there was an internal decision to label it as a serious and complex issue. So any moment, any time that we receive proposals that involve AI, almost automatically go through that ethics assessment procedure, which involves the appointment of an independent panel composed of 5 to 7 experts that look at the proposal carefully. They produce a report, an ethics assessment report that contains certain lines, action plans and certain recommendations that become part of the contract signed between the European Commission and the applicant. No matter if it's a consortium or a fellow at a certain university. So this report is for us a very important exercise and the outcome of, let's say, where our concerns, our advice is there to make sure that researchers are well guided going before they start working on an issue like this, on AI. Having said that, we now see a lot of proposals that contain AI or refer to AI or imply the application of AI systems or AI techniques, but they are not necessarily touching or raising ethics issues. So we are aware of the fact that not any AI project is ethically sensitive. Also, what is important to mention, and some of you know it because you have worked with that, and responds also to the point, or let's say is in agreement with the point that Migle made. We have developed an ex post ethics assessment, meaning that we don't limit ourselves to an ex ante control and I would say an educated guess as to what the project may raise as an ethical issue, but we're also trying to see what is happening on the ground, and by that I'm referring to the actual research. So with there we try to monitor the project and to stop it just before the sensitive, let's say, research plan takes place, and then we perform this type of what we call ethics check or ethics audit in order to make sure that the researchers again are well guided just before the project goes forward. And that responds to the point that Migle said about the dynamic nature of the ethics review assessment. They need to be dynamic. They have to depart from the traditional, rather static bioethics way of framing these reviews in order to respond to the dynamic challenges that AI is raising. So more concretely, what we do, as you know, we had the EU guidelines on AI, on trustworthy AI, that were complemented by the ALTAI list back in 2019. Since then, we're trying to break down these principles, and we believe in what also Migle said, and what the panel is about, how to operationalize ethics principles on the ground. It's important not only for us, but more importantly for the researchers, because most of them are not ethically trained. Most of them have no clue about what ethics is about or what ethics principles are about, and how, that's more important, how to implement them. And since what we're experiencing is a multiplication of initiatives that bring forward new codes of conduct, new declarations, new frameworks, the researchers come back to us and ask us to which standard we should, assess our proposals should be assessed against. And this is where we need to find practical ways, smart ways to help them. And we think that by operationalizing these high-level principles, it's one way, one step closer to their own reality. We help them in a practical way. We also try to follow the discussion on the ethics standards. Also, Migle mentioned that. I think technology there plays a role, and I think it's for the first time that I see technology or standardization organizations that are trying to translate ethical values into real standards. That is, I think, one of the unique opportunities or experiments where you see the quantification of ethics values. And of course, we don't limit ourselves to that. We also try to fund projects that their sole focus is to study the ethical dimension of AI and of other technologies. I'm not going to say more about the ethics guidelines themselves. I'm going to focus mostly on this part, on the operationalization. Mostly to also mention the fact that the guidelines themselves, when they were adopted, they were asking the Commission to acknowledge and address the potential tensions between these principles. So it's not work that we do it without having any normative basis. We see in our own realities that principles alone cannot guarantee ethical trustworthy AI. That is something that it's not only us, but other funding organizations are facing as a challenge. And also we are confronted with a new legal landscape. The adoption of the AI Act, we have the Commission recommendation on critical technologies that brings forward the need to protect fundamental rights, human rights. So there are new, let's say, blocks on the legal foundation of the EU that trigger the need for us also to respond mutandis as to how this should be translated to the research environment. And also, as I said, we need to support researchers. We also try to, let's say, move away from the traditional viewing of ethics reviews as a red tape mechanism and to transform it into, it has always been a help desk mechanism, but to make it even more visible that we are here to support research and to make sure that innovation happens, but within a specific context. And that's why we keep on repeating the famous concept of responsible innovation. One example of these operational guidelines is the guidance on ethics by design that three flagship projects of ours, let's say, developed, and then we translate it into a reference document for the Horizon Europe. Right now, we're very close to publish almost, I would say, 3 out of these 4 guidance notes on algorithmic bias, another one on audits, and the third one on fundamental rights, impact assessment. This is where Alessandro has the lead and was the author of that guidance note, and I think that's the human rights aspect or the fundamental rights aspect probably is going to be developed by the rest of the speakers better than me. These notes are going to be published, and this is where we are going to ask researchers to look at when the research involves AI, the development of AI systems. I also want to mention, because I don't know how much time I have, the fact that not only the legal landscape is changing, but also the policy landscape when it comes to AI research is changing. And by that, I'm referring to the strategy, the AI in science strategy that the Commission has developed. This is a new plan for how AI should be, let's say, treated in the research environment. And there are different, I would say, reports and milestones that are associated to that strategy. And also, I need to mention the fact that there is also the AI continent initiative. One might wonder, why am I referring to this dimension, to these policy initiatives? The main reason is the fact that in the first strategy, the AI in science strategy, there is an ethics block to that. So we're trying to make sure that there is the ethics is a standalone pillar in the efforts, in the EU's efforts to make sure that the AI is a significant part of the research framework, but also a multiplier of the efforts of the Commission of the Union to become relevant in innovation terms. And I'll close, I'll have one last slide where I want to bring forward some questions, questions that are not necessarily AI related. Or AI strictly related. I would say that the relationship between human rights and ethics, and having referred to the work of Alessandro, is a tension or an interaction or a dialogue that sometimes is confuses us and our ethics experts, because some of them have been trained in fundamental rights issues, some others in ethics, and sometimes they keep on emphasizing different dimensions of certain challenges that research projects bring forward. And there is also a tension between ethics and law. And this goes, I think, even deeper back in the beginning of the foundation of our legal systems, and how much of these ethical principles or the ethical dimension or the ethical requirements that the reports contain are legally dressed or can become by themselves a legal obligation, even without being part of the EU legal framework. Another challenge relates to the applicability of the AI Act. I think Migle made a point there, and I think it's an important point that we as research organizations and researchers themselves are going to be let's say, the experimental hubs where the applicability of the Act, where the prohibited practices, where everything enshrined as a legal obligation is going to be tested. So we have to, as I said before, mutandis, see, try to follow, try to apply, try to stretch the ideas contained in the Act, and to see how to find out how many of them are relevant to the research environment. And also that relates to the discussion and we have with Alessandro on different occasions about the research exception of the AI Act. Also, what is important is to find out how much of room and space is there for ethics. There is a new policy context. You saw the Draghi report, the Letta report. There are and there aren't references to ethics in some of these documents. The main point here is that since we're entering into a defense union, a competitiveness approach towards innovation, we really need to keep in mind and we really need to make sure that ethics is well embedded into this, I would say, a new market ecosystem. And last but not least, what we always repeat and I think emphasize is the need, and that is not coming from us. It's not a top-down reflection. It's, I would say, a bottom-up reflection. The need to continue training researchers and to continue providing them with the necessary tools in order to be well guided when they undertake this type of research. Because AI research, the way we see it, is going to be multiplied, is going to become a major component of our research pillar, and we have to be prepared we need to prepare an anticipatory framework in order to make sure that public money is well spent and it is spent in what we call ethically sound AI research. Thank you.
Thank you, Michaelis. Thank you for this overview of the different issues that are addressed by the European Commission through the research program, also not just to focus on the ethics assessment, but the broader strategy of the Commission. I don't want to make any comments because we have a very short time, so I prefer to give the floor to the next speaker, and then so we hope we have some interaction with the audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Michals, for laying the ground for what I will be talking about. So I will speak from my experience as one of many experts participating in the ethics panel set up by the European Commission at different points in the life cycle of a research project. And I will first try to highlight some of the more practical challenges that we've been facing over the last couple of years, and then maybe say a couple words about how these can be solved in a more systematic way. But I also look forward to hearing what's your take on this, all of you. So, so the question is, how do the traditional structures, ethics structures, and practices meet the challenges that the AI has been posing? And for a long time, these traditional approaches have somehow struggled to provide good answers. And this is for several reasons, but as a result, we often were faced with a situation where there were simply, in very practical terms, no ethical committees that could provide assessments for this sort of project. And let me explain what I mean by that. So in principle, the way it usually works, the process carried out by the Commission is somehow additional to what the host institution does. So, for example, like in the traditional situation where we have research with humans, this is the role and the responsibility of the host institution to make sure that the project has all the necessary opinions, and then the ethics process carried out by the Commission is somehow like an overview. But in the case of projects with AI, we often were asking the people who wrote those projects, those proposals, to obtain an ethics approval from their host institutions, and then we heard that, okay, but there is no ethics committee at my institution who can review that project. So that was very, very practical challenge, and over the years that has changed to some extent because the host institution universities have started to setting up these specialized ethics committees, but that wasn't the case for a long time, and this had to do with the fact that this is a new field of science, and for example, in biomedical science, it took decades for the research ethics procedures and structures to be developed. Here, we had to act really fast, and related to that is another challenge. Basically, the fact that for a long time we relied on adjacent ethical frameworks to assess AI projects. So what I mean by that is a lot of attention was paid to issues around processing of personal data, and basically ethics review in many cases boiled down to looking at how the project deals with personal data, which unfortunately oftentimes turns into like a checkbox exercise and a more legal exercise of seeing whether the project actually complies with GDPR, but ethics is more than legal compliance. So that was one part of that, and the other part was when we started thinking about how the system might be actually used after the project finishes, right? Once the research results are applied, and here we enter into the field of misuse, which is of course very, very important. But then the question always is, to what extent can we expect the researcher to foresee how their project will be, how the results of their project will be used. So. Something that Migla said before, that the ethics review should be that moment where we actually can assess whether the AI being developed within a project is the sort of AI that we want. Well, this is quite tricky because from those of you who are familiar with the process, the ethics review at the Commission at least happens after the project is already scientifically evaluated. So all the projects that reach the ethics expert have already been approved from a scientific point of view. But then you see, as an ethics expert, for example, a number of projects that in our opinion, for example, should not be funded at all. So what do you do then? You're not supposed to comment on the science, right? You're not supposed to comment on the scientific part. But how am I supposed to assess a predictive policing project where I have very, very far-reaching ethical concerns whether predictive policing is both ethical and whether it's scientifically sound, right? I've been working on this topic for a long time. I have been a part of projects that try to develop the sort of sound methods in that area, and I know the sort of challenges that are faced there. So, and this is somewhat unsolvable in the current system. I mean, important thing to point out: the ethics experts do have the right, do have the mandate to stop the project if they see that it should not be implemented, but this is highly, highly rare when that happens. And also, we must understand that the projects, that the proposals researchers write are in response to very specific work programs that the Commission sets up. So in a way, we would have to take that even further and ask about the kind of priorities that the Commission sets up for the EU funding, and that again turns into a political discussion, right? And we're just 5 experts trying to make sense of it all. So this just highlights for me the fact that in these sort of projects, the line between ethics and science is not that clear cut, and especially in this more controversial areas, we need to be really careful. Another challenge is that many even scientists, many people in this space fall for AI hype, and that often skews the judgment and the assessment of the projects. And again, both at the stage of scientific assessment and then at the stage of the ethics assessment. You'd be surprised what kind of methodologies are considered scientifically sound in some of the AI projects. For example, in terms of the size of the sample. When we have research with humans, we know that we can't base our findings on 10 healthy people, right, on data coming from 10 healthy people in order to develop the system that's supposed to do X or Y. But in the AI space, somehow we forget about that, and then projects that are supposed to develop a system to be implemented in real life have these approaches of having, for example, this is just one example, having a very small sample, and then based on that developing something, and then implementing that right away. So we need to be careful and we need to be a bit more skeptical, but then this again goes back to what I said, the line between scientific and ethical research and ethical assessment is not that clear cut. And maybe two more things. So on the one hand, there's the AI hype that most of us once in a while fall for. But then there's something that Mihai's already alluded to, mentioned, is this innovation agenda, right? We all hear that EU must become more competitive, must become more innovative. And you see that in a way that also impacts the way these processes are carried out, because we are told that we can't hinder innovation, right? And that's basically the role of ethics, to hinder innovation, bad innovation, but hinder innovation, right? Or at least create some friction, right? And we hate friction these days, right? Friction is bad. So and thankfully there's always a couple of people doing these assessments. So there are those who are more innovation friendly. There are those more skeptical about how much money should be poured into this field, but it's an actual challenge that we face. And finally, maybe something on ethics washing. This is not a new problem, but it comes up in AI research as well, and in practice, we see that the ethics sometimes become this. I mean, maybe it's always been the case, but becomes this add-on, right? This like sprinkle a little bit of ethics on the project, and it's gonna be fine. And especially, and we all know that it doesn't work like this, and it's challenging because on the one hand, we don't want to hinder scientific freedom, but at the same time, we know that many of these projects are not just research, they are working on services and products that are to be implemented. So from the very start, these ethical concerns need to be addressed, need to be baked into the system in order for then what comes out of it to be ethically compliant, but also legally compliant. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susanna. And I leave the floor to David, and there is a presentation. Here is the point.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Let's wait for the slides to appear. So I work in the data and digital sector of the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights, where we have been focusing on fundamental rights and artificial intelligence for many, many years. We also look into online content moderation and fundamental rights, as well as data protection in our sector. And overall, I mean, the agency is there to collect data, to do analysis, and provide input to the EU institutions and member states and advising on fundamental rights issues. And of course, new technologies and AI is a very relevant area in there. We have no position on ethics or fundamental rights in research assessments. I think my previous speakers know more about this than I do. But we of course also were in touch on this topic, and when looking into fundamental rights implications of using AI, there are some similarities. But obviously there's a case of treating research a bit different, because it's a different case. So what I will do now is to start speaking a bit of our research on fundamental rights implications when using AI, and then have a reflection on how these impact assessments on fundamental rights are currently regulated. And then we'll continue with a few of like my own reflections on what this also means in terms of research before Alessandro, who really worked on that, can provide further guidance on how this is done in the research process. No, I wanted to go back. That was too fast. Can I go back to that? Yeah, thank you. So these are the main publications we put out over the past years, and I think like the timeline, as also Alessandra was mentioning, reflects a bit how the hype came about, and also how policy making went about artificial intelligence. And so we had the first paper in 2018 on discrimination and algorithms, and that was the time when the Commission got active, and also when that was mentioned before, this high-level expert group on AI was established in 2018, where I was an observer too, and my head of unit was a member of this group, and where the ethics of AI were discussed highly, and very impactful policy recommendations came out that also led to the decision to regulate further in this area. And just one, I think, interesting reflection that was mentioned before is on ethics, almost ethics versus rights. It's not ethics versus rights, it's ethics and rights. But during these policy-making processes, for us as Fundamental Rights Agency, it was always important to highlight the rights-based approach. That's nothing against ethics, but it had like also an important instrumental reason for that was because ethics is also used often, especially by companies, you know, to have a more soft approach to, in a way, avoid regulation. So we have a very nice ethics guide, but yeah, we actually don't want to have more regulation. And with a fundamental rights approach really helps saying like this is legally binding, at least on the member states, to protect those rights. And if they're not protected in practice, you need to come up with laws to provide further protections. I've also seen, I mean, I remember well, it was in January 2020 at the CPDP conference where these discussions came up, and then people started reflecting also on panels like, how can we operationalize ethics internationally that apply to AI? And that when, yeah, we had to come in also with comment and saying, look, there is something that is an agreed upon ethics framework, which is the human rights framework, which is the Charter of Fundamental Rights in the EU. And I think that's really the starting point for any ethics assessments. Of course, the academic exercise is a bit different, but just saying like why a rights approach is also very helpful there, because there's also a lot of understanding what certain ethics mean in practice. Yeah, and then so we had this report in 2020, Getting the Future Right, which had this horizontal analysis of fundamental rights and AI. I will speak 2 minutes about it in a moment, but then also just wanted to say we had a report on bias in algorithms where we also did research using AI, whatever you define it, but tried, like we developed speech detection algorithms. And in order not to use them, but to actually investigate them to see like how much bias is in there, right? So we used social media data to try to detect offensive speech that was already labeled by researchers, and then invented a lot of text, and then you can just see changing one word, changing the word like Christian to Muslim really changes the predictions for offensive hate. And they're just showing that there's quite some bias. So that's also very important in research, especially when you do AI research, and then look into certain aspects to understand where something can go wrong. And this we learn quite a lot about society, actually, because AI only works if there are structures in society, repeated structures that are highly correlated. And looking into that in an ethical assessment or fundamental rights impact assessment really helps us understanding better where society goes wrong. Yeah, so that's what we usually highlight as a starting point for fundamental rights impact of AI. Of course, data protection and privacy, Article 7 and 8 of the Charter are really important. More data, more granularity, more analysis really can much more interfere with your right to privacy. So that needs to be paid attention to. You know, the classical example, if you have cameras on the streets and afterwards, if something happens, police can look into what happened there manually, is different to having a face recognition system running on it all the time. So it just changes the way how you can intrude in the privacy of people. Secondly, equality and non-discrimination is an important and big area that always has to be considered. Article 21 on non-discrimination of the Charter, but also rights of special groups, like rights of people with disabilities, rights of the child, are always important because we just know that algorithms can be biased for several reasons, and they can just perpetuate discrimination, but they can also create discrimination or even reinforce it in practice. And the third big area we highlighted is access to an effective remedy, mainly based on Article 47 of the Charter, the most often used article. You, of course, if there's AI used for making decisions about people, people have the right to complain. And if you complain, those using AI cannot say, it's like, I don't know, that was the AI output, I don't know what happened. So you have to explain how you arrive at certain decisions. And that's a big topic, because obviously a lot of people say AI is very complex, so I don't know what's going on. So that's why also fundamental rights impact assessments include a lot of description of the system to get an understanding of what is actually going on. And then, of course, any other right may be impacted on, because AI is a technology that you can at least try to use in all areas. If it works is the other question, but that's also where research comes in, because you can, in research, try to see, like, does it work? Can I predict something in this area or not? Yes, so back in 2020, we said, like, had a basic overview of what impact assessments should look like. There was already a big call from academia, from civil society, to have mandatory fundamental rights impact assessments regulated. And yeah, they usually start with a description of the purpose, the context, and legal basis of the AI tool you want to use. And that's, I think, especially also then for the research assessment, so important, like, really consider what's the purpose, like what task you want to take over with the use of AI, as you also mentioned in the first intervention, because also only based on the purpose you can assess if the interference with fundamental rights is justifiable or not. Because that really varies. So the description of possible harm is the second part, like what happens, and this way you can, like, is it necessary to use, is it proportionate to use? And then the description of the technology and the data used. It looks like an innocent sentence on the slide, but it's quite difficult. But here I think it's really important to, especially when you're non-technical expert, to be harsh with the technical experts, to push them to explain in easy words what they are using. Because when they use words that you don't understand, then usually they don't understand themselves. And there's nothing that prevents you from describing what you do, you know, and people often say, it's too complex, but there are ways to especially look into the training data, to do some tests on the description of the accuracy which we have there. And there are also ways to look into the black box in a way. So this way you can go quite far already in your assessments. Moving on. Yes, so, and there are many models for impact assessment out there that people worked on. And I think all of them are useful. Many of them are used, and there's, of course, discussions how you use them, and I look forward to also what the Commission will publish for research in this area. What is, of course, also the reality is that the AI Act includes fundamental rights impact assessments. I think here it's important to, just also acknowledge that the AI Act is a political compromise. It's, as I like to say, the result of a democratic outcome. So it is complex, but this ugly table shows you that there are several places where fundamental rights safeguards are included in the AI Act. It's just not one single provision, but it's different ones. I just highlight here the risk management in Article 9. So that's where providers of AI systems have to look into fundamental rights. And then the fundamental rights impact assessment, the one that is called like this, is in Article 27, which is for certain deployers mandatory to look into it. But of course, the deployer need to also rely on the information they get from the provider. And also there's Article 10 on data governance, looking into bias and data quality, the technical documentation. So all of this is a bigger picture that one can use to assess fundamental rights in a much better way. Now turning to research, the reflections. I think I have one more minute, so I have to be fast. There's the research exemption. We heard about it. Don't want to say it. Like, when you look into research, it's of course still the question, what is research? How is that defined? And of course, what is relevant? Research works a lot within disciplines, and within different disciplines, you have different standards that are then acknowledged scientific standards, and they vary. There are also different ethical standards. I think there's a lot of experience in medical research, for example, and in other areas to do these ethics assessments. But of course, being transparent and having reproducible research is also an important aspect of research quality that needs to be taken into account. And I think one reflection also is to okay, I won't jump into this. If you're interested where actually much of the AI hype comes from, is you can read the paper from Leo Breman, who is a computer scientist, and it's really the way computer scientists use statistics compared to traditional statistics, where you reflect on your model. That's the way I was trained, right? You have a theory in mind and you look into the whatever, but then computer scientists come in and say, I don't care, I just want to see how well it predicts. And that's really a bit the source of what then led to AI in different ways. I'm aware I'm out of time, so the last slide, ethics in research, there are examples where there were big discussions about ethics in research. You know, there was one guy who tried to predict sexual orientation from faces, very populist research. I don't think it's illegal to do that, but I think it's very unethical. Especially when you read the paper, it's low quality, especially in terms of interpretation of why there's a difference, right? But that was promoted well, and people pick it up in the news, so that's an issue. There was the discussion, I think, on lie detection at borders, which is a bit difficult, especially also from the scientific point of view, not only that this cannot be used in practice. And then it gets really worse sometimes, and because people think, that's the last sentence, AI is something new, so, oh, cool, and then some researcher thought you can detect criminality from faces, right? And that throws us immediately back 100 years from now. And that was published in a scientific journal. It was retracted afterwards, but you can really see if there's something new, old problems come back. So paying attention to this in research is like really important. And I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. Just in terms of organization, there is just a short presentation, the last one, that tried to connect the different dots. And we already mentioned that the ethics aspect is part of the assessment that we do. What is important to highlight is that when we talk about ethical assessment, in the ethical assessment, we already include many aspects that are not ethical, but are legal aspects. And so it's not something new when we talk about fundamental rights impact assessment in the context of ethical assessment, because already now in the ethical assessment, please, the presentation, please. Guys, the presentation. Okay, thank you. And we already have in the impact assessment, for instance, with regard to AI, with regard to data protection, with regard to the protection of animals, dual use, etc. So when we talk about ethical assessment, we don't talk about something that is purely ethical in this sense. Of course, the rising concern about AI opened the discussion about how to include also the legal aspects concerning AI in the ethical assessment. And just to skip this introduction, the point is Article 2 of the AI Act, because Article 2 of the AI Act included two exemptions. One is a broad exemption to 6 about the use of AI in the context of research, and in the second exception in 2.8 is about the stage before putting on the market the AI. So the first one is a general research purpose. The second one is the research and development phase of an industrial production. Are two different exceptions. What is the difference? The first one is broader to some extent than the second. But there are also limitations, because the first one is for the specifically developed, a system of AI specifically developed and put into service for the sole purpose of scientific research. And this, of course, also in terms of funded projects by EU. Many EU projects are not just for the sole purpose of research, but also an industrialization phase, we can say. If you are not in this exception, you can benefit from the second exception that say that the stage in which we run the research and development before putting on the market is exempt per the Act. But what is the problem? The problem is that first, in 2.8, the real world testing is under the AI Act. Second, in 2.6, it's true that the research purpose, if the only purpose of your research is out of the AI Act, but in many cases, when you run a research, it's not just for research, but you want to also consider also the funding, how are managed in Europe. You want to transform the research output in something that is in industrial application. So for this reason, we have not well emphasized the idea that the research is not under the AI Act. Because at the end of the day, the researcher that won't transform his research in an industry impact should consider the AI Act, because if not, we have a strange situation in which during the research you don't care about the AI Act, and then you cannot put on the market your product. So this is the tricky point. For this reason, it is important to introduce the conformity to some extent to the AI Act already in the research evaluation, and so introduce the fundamental rights impact assessment already in evaluation. Also because it's true what was mentioned also by David, that there is Article 27, we fight to have Article 27, but Article 27 is limited public sector and some categories of industry. But regardless of the 27, fundamental rights are still protected. So it is not a protection that has been created by the AI Act. Your fundamental rights are always protected. If you create an AI system that is against fundamental rights, this may impact on the people. Unfortunately, we have also some EU projects that have this negative outcome, not with AI, but close to the AI. And so we risk a legal action. And this, of course, is an issue even more so for researchers and for research community, university, because it's a matter of reputation. When you create a strange border control system and there is a legal action in terms of infringement of fundamental rights, of course, this is a backslash for the reputation of the university, for the reputation of the EU that funds this kind of project. So it's important to keep in mind that the protection of fundamental rights is not created by the AI Act. So in this sense, what is the key point, but we have very few minutes to touch it, is the fact that we have to create a system for assessing the impact on fundamental rights. But when we created this system, during these days, we have several panels on fundamental rights impact assessment. What is the problem? Many of these solutions are not grounded in the logic of fundamental rights. Many of these solutions are based on the idea that we create something that is mathematically oriented. We create something that transforms in digits, in number, and in mathematical formula the impact on fundamental rights. This is a very data-driven approach to some extent, but is not consistent with the framework of fundamental rights, neither could be easy to demonstrate in front of a court, because at the end all these assessments are done in order to prevent the effect of a litigation. But in front of the court, the judge will never consider a formula for assessing the impact on fundamental rights. And you say that your formula say that the impact on freedom of expression is between 0.5 and 0.8 is not so strong in terms of argument in front of a court. So for this reason, the work that we have done with the DG Research is focusing on a methodology that cover the three main steps of risk assessment. First part is more focused on a sort of questionnaire that outline what are the key elements of your product, or in this case of research, of course, the key elements of your research. This is important also in the way in which you draft your proposal, because in the proposal should be some elements about how you use AI, which kind of data you use for training AI, all the information that can make possible to understand what are you doing. The second point is the information about the potential impact of the rights and the assessment of the level of impact. An assessment of level of impact is the key point, and based on the assessment, you can define the risk management. Of course, all this stuff should be in the proposal in terms of research. So it's a sort of scenario analysis. You don't know exactly what is the impact. You have to predict what is the impact. In this sense, it's an assessment. Also, given this constraint, the typical approach is using scaling, using matrix, using solution that combine the different components of the risk. The components of the risk are in Article 3 of the AI Act, but are common knowledge. So are basically the likelihood and the severity. When we consider the likelihood, it's important not to think likelihood just in terms of probability, but consider also how many people are potentially affected. And when we consider severity, we have to consider not just severity, but also the reaction, how much is easy to react. For instance, in some research project, we have a potential significant impact, but the experiment is done in a laboratory. And so the researcher can interact with AI and can mitigate potential risk. So this is the logic, this is the core content, we say, of the methodology that we are developing to be incorporated in the self-assessment. So in the self-assessment, we should use some approaches like this one based on matrix in order to give the possibility to the researcher to assess, at least at general level, the potential impact on fundamental rights of their research, such as they do with the data protection impact assessment, and more broadly with all the other aspects concerning the AI, the ethics assessment. Here there is a list of what is bad in terms of methodology, what are the main mistakes that you can do in assessing the fundamental rights, but I would prefer to stop here and just to leave 5 minutes for question, if there are some questions.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's very, very interesting. My name is Dimitra Camarino. I come from Queen Mary. I'm a data protection lawyer, so I don't know much about ethics, but I wanted to ask you, when you were showing the tables, for the impact assessment that the researchers have to do they have to do it also for the positive impact that, it's the negative impact, of course, that will have for people who are impacted negatively, but also there are positive impacts, right, for the people they're actually doing it for. So in a way, I was thinking like the courts balance the, rights against each other. Do you do the same thing with the ethics? So do you say, this is the ethical principles or considerations for the people who might be negatively affected, but also, do we have an ethical obligation to people who might be positively impacted, like for medical research, for example?
Okay,
thank you.
From that, I can address two, please.
Thank you. This is actually hotly debated often, and there are different views on it. I can only share mine. I think overall, most of the times when people want to use AI, it's for a good purpose, right? And so it's good to use. You just have to rule out infringements with fundamental rights that are not justified. In that way, it's not necessary that you look like where is it good, like where do I improve on the fundamental rights or where do I get wrong, but you start actually by looking into where do I interfere with fundamental rights. And then you look like, can I justify this interference or not in view of the purpose what comes out. But strictly speaking, it's, as you're saying, it is this, I don't like the term balancing, but it's like, can you justify the interference to the extent that it is acceptable for the purpose that comes out in the end? So that's a bit on the language, on the positive and negative. In the end, for example, when you process personal data, it's always like that, right? When I know your name, right, I'm interfering with your privacy. Do I need to know your name? Do I need to know your social security number? Probably not. So that's always the kind of test how much you interfere and have to interfere. However, one last point. What I still found interesting in our research is also when we ask people why they use AI, it's everyone always saying efficiency most of the time. Efficiency, we want to do things quicker and faster, but very rarely, and I would like to see more often that we want to do things better in a fairer way, right? Because we know how biased human decision making is. And it shouldn't get worse when you use AI, but there are ways when you test it properly to actually use it for fairer decision making, maybe.
Yeah, if I may just on the fundamental rights assessment methodology, there is not a risk-benefit assessment. It's not a risk-benefit assessment. As the benefits can be, as mentioned by David, considered if in the terms of balancing test between competing interests. That is the logic of fundamental rights, by the way. So, for instance, if you want to use AI in order to detect crime, in order to prevent a crime effect, that is a benefit to some extent, but from a legal perspective, it's just another interest, like the protection of public interest or safety, etc., that can under certain conditions, to prevail on other competing rights. But the pure risk-benefit approach was rejected both by the AI Act and the Framework Convention of the Council of Europe.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. Magdalena Brywczyńska, Tilburg University, and I'm actually an independent ethics advisor on a currently ongoing Horizon project, so I'm a bit step further than what you've discussed. But I would be curious to hear your opinion on the division of tasks between the independent ethics advisor and basically the ethics review board that is at the university in situations when the PI of a project is an academic institution. Because I see that there's a little bit of multiplication of tasks, and I wonder how that can affect the independence if you basically receive already an assessment, an approval from the ethics review board from the university, and in most countries and most universities, there's already quite a well-established procedure on how it happens. So yeah, would you have any reflections on that? Thank you very much.
Yeah, maybe very briefly, what I can say to that, I think that in a situation when there's established structure for the ethics approvals at institutions, the position of an ethics advisor is more to guide the researcher along the way rather than, you know, and in the end, the independent ethics advisor is never the one who should give permission or not, right? It's not that mandate. You don't have that power, basically. but it's more about guiding the researcher, and ultimately it's based on trust, right? So we as ethics panels, we trust the host institution to do a good job, and only in extraordinary cases when we see that there's something going terribly wrong, we can question their opinion or their green lighting something. So indeed there might be some tension, but going back to like if there's an established structure, we trust that structure, and then it shouldn't be replacing or it shouldn't be duplicating. It should be something on top of that.
Any other question? Any other comment? Just a short question, because there are people that are pressing to enter.
Thanks. My name is Ezgi. I'm a lawyer. My question comes a bit from confusion in the sense that, so as I understand, there is the aim to approach with a certain methodology to ethics assessment in reviewing the projects, but what hasn't been that clear to me is whether or not the scope includes the purpose in general, or like what the project is doing to achieve the purpose, because what has not been so clear, at least on my end, is whether the goal here is to, to also take into assessment what the funding authority has already decided to fund, but only the scope of the project and how it's trying to reach this purpose. So this hasn't been very clear on my end.
The point there was that this line is sometimes difficult to draw, but to give it a very short answer, no. So the ethics assessment is not there to see if the project is achieving the goal. This is the science, right? This is the science, whether it's achieving the goal or not. Whether the goal is correct, that's a bigger question, and it's not up for this process to provide answer to that.
There are two panels. One panel assesses the scientific output expected, and if they say that is okay, they approve the project. But to run the project, they pass the ethical assessment. This sequence, scientific and ethics, is something discussed over the time, I think, but is considered the best way in order to operationalize the two-step. And we end with this question and this short reply the panel. Thank you so much for attending the panel. If you have any question, we are here around so we can dig more. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mihalis.